Pope Francis, in his speech to different pastoral workers in 2013 in Assisi, simply recalled that, and I quote, "A bishop cannot lead a diocese without a pastoral council, and a parish priest cannot lead a parish without his pastoral council." This statement is very much in line with the theme that is the subject of this little reflection. How can pastoral councils be renewed in a synodal way? The first thing we have to remember is that the fact of the birth of pastoral council is quite close in time, is a consequence of the Second Vatican Council itself, which created it by the decree Christus Dominus, and also by the decree of Ad Gentes, where this new pastoral structure is spoken of, which is called to collaborate with the pastors in the government of the diocese. A totally new structure that hadn't existed until that moment in the history of the Church, and which responds simply to the conciliar ecclesiology of the Church, understood as the people of God. And that Church, which, configured as a communion of the diverse, needs the collaboration of all in the one mission. The Diocesan Pastoral Council is thus configured as a very important body for manifesting this Church as the people of God, this Church communion, and more concretely, now in the perspective of the Church, all of which is synodal. It is a basic pastoral structure for the government of the diocese. The document of the International Theological Commission on Synodality in the life and mission of the Church recalls that precisely at the local level, the main priority structure fundamental to the establishment of a synodal church in the dioceses is the Diocesan Pastoral Council or Pastoral Diocesan Council. These concerns, which had been growing over time, have been very evident in the last assembly of the Synod of Bishops, which took place last October in Rome, and in two of the proposals presented in the document, the final synthesis relation, it is precisely this specific issue that is discussed, number 12K, which literally says, "It is requested to make the Episcopal Council and the Diocesan and Parish Pastoral Council mandatory and to make the diocesan bodies of co-responsibility more operational also at the level of law." And in number 18H of the same synthesis, we're told, "On the basis of the understanding of the people of God as an active subject of the evangelizing mission, codify the obligatory nature of pastoral councils in the Christian community and in the local church. At the same time, they should strengthen the bodies of participation with an appropriate presence of laymen and women, with attributions of functions of discernment in view of truly apostolic decisions." Well, in order to understand these two proposals, it would be useful to recall a little about the recent history of this structure, which the Code of Canon Law includes in Canons 511 to 514 of the current Code, and that there is also a reference in Canon 536 when talking about the Pastoral Council at the parish level. Although we will focus mainly on the Diocesan Pastoral Council, which is the object of this small intervention, as I was saying, the conciliar decrees Christus Dominus and Ad Gentes speak of this council that had no precedent in the history of the Church. And a little later, in 1966, Pope Paul VI, with the motu proprio Ecclesiae Sanctae, gave the pertinent instructions so that this reality could begin to exist in the different dioceses of the world. A few years later, in 1971, the Synod of Bishops talks about the Diocesan Pastoral Council and makes two statements that are very important to us on the subject. The first is that it be strengthened in the dioceses as a complement to the action of the presbyteral councils. And secondly, that its consultative mission is to facilitate with the reflections the establishment of concrete channels for pastoral action. These two proposals made by the Synod of Bishops in 1971 came to fruition a little later. In 1973, in a circular letter that the Congregation for the Clergy gave to all the dioceses of the world, after having carried out a study, a great consultation at the ecclesial level on the already existing experiences of the pastoral councils and their implementation in different parts of the world. Following these doctrinal principles of the Council of the Church, people of God, participation, and one mission in which we are all co-responsible. Well, after this circular letter, it is practically defined what these diocesan pastoral councils should be. And this same regulation is reflected in the canons that I have quoted from the Code, practically literally. In 1988, it was Pope John Paul II who recalled the importance of these diocesan pastoral councils, proposing them as a very important and principal place of discernment. The Pope speaks of diocesan pastoral council as the place where one has to judge what is or is not appropriate to do at any given moment in the pastoral of the diocese. And therefore, it is not simply a place of reflection. It is also a place of collaboration in the governance of the diocese and of decision-making. It is true that Pope John Paul II, following the canon norms, refers to the main function of council and to a secondary function of decision-making when the diocesan bishop deems it appropriate. That's why Pope John Paul II in Christi Fidelis Laici, to favor its creation where it does not yet exist, and that it is urgent, which although the Code does not ask for it as mandatory, it seems that it is an inescapable pastoral urgency. In the same vein, the Pastoral Directory for the Life and Ministry of the Bishops, Apostolorum Successores, of the year 2004, re-emphasizes these ideas fundamentally and repeats that it is necessary to set the work of these councils in motion in order to effectively accompany the work of pastors. Indeed, as we have said, in the canons of the Code, it appears as a very important pastoral instrument, but it does not appear as an obligatory instrument. In fact, it is up to each of the bishops to consider whether or not it is needed in their diocese. In spite of this, the post-Code magisterium has been insisting on the need for them to be implemented, even if they are not mandatory. The first person to make it obligatory for Anglican group was Pope Benedict XVI, who in 2009, when he created these ordinariates of the Anglicans, did not place the ordinariates pastoral council as something optional, but incorporated it as a reality that must exist obligatorily in these ordinariates, and that it must be contemplated in the statutes proper to the ordinariate, which must be approved by the Holy See. Pope Francis himself, in a meeting he had with pastoral agents in 2013, reminded us at the beginning of his speech. He says that although the Code does not have, that it does not in fact make it obligatory, it doesn't seem proper that a diocese or a parish can be governed without this invaluable help. That being the case, the last synod that we're celebrating in the last synodal assembly that took place in Rome, one of the first proposals is that it be made mandatory. Well, indeed, this obligation is a further step towards the realization of the importance of the councils as instruments of synodality and the inescapable obligation of the bishops to set them up where they are not. The problem remains the same. Obligatory refers to the importance of the institution, but it is not automatically effective. Does this mean that some elements, in addition to the obligatory nature, we have to consider for the implementation of these diocesan pastoral councils? To begin, I think it's very important that in addition to being considered mandatory, we need to see how to set them up in a configuration where the members who make up the diocesan councils have a real impact on the will of the grassroots. I mean, that when it comes to setting up these councils, the majority of the members come from decisions that have been taken at the level of parishes, at the level of archpriesthood or pastoral areas, in such a way that there is a true representativeness of the different realities of what the diocesan church is in the place. Second, in addition to this obligatory nature and the plural and very situated configuration of the members that compose it, I think it is also very important to establish, at the very least, the need for the call, convocation. Right now, that call is mandatory once a year, but personally, I think this is completely insufficient, because once a year there is hardly enough to talk about a topic, even if the meeting lasts more than a day minimum. And at least there should be 2 annual convocations, one at the beginning of the pastoral course to program and see what the needs and urgencies are that have to be implemented in the pastoral plan during the year. And also a second moment at the end of the pastoral year to evaluate how this plan has been put into practice, what the difficulties have been, what have been the achievements to evaluate in order to be able to progress. At the very least, these 2 convocations for programming and evaluation seem to be absolutely necessary. It is clear that the most frequent convocation, if the council is very complex, is made up of many members. It can make that difficult, but there is the possibility that in the statutes of the pastoral council there are permanent commissions or standing committees that allow for a more frequent meeting without having to summon all the members of the pastoral council, especially when it comes to addressing problems that need a slightly more urgent solution. Third, it is very important that in addition to the fact that it's mandatory by law, that it be convened more than once by law, that it be configured by such a diversity that it reveals the reality of the diocese. Progress must be made on the purely advisory nature of these councils. Certainly, the Code talks about this point, and we have to take a step forward. It cannot be merely a consultative body, much less can it be an organism that serves only to receive communications from the authority of the diocese. The consultative nature has to be closely linked to the joint elaboration of decisions. And in that sense, I think that there are some aspects that should not be taken as facts without having first counted on the Diocesan Pastoral Council. We had already talked about something when we talk about the Diocesan Pastoral Plan. I think this is a very important point. The Diocesan Pastoral Plan is a proposal that the bishop makes for the diocese in a specific time, in the short, medium, and long term, And it is clear that this pastoral plan will be much more realistic and much better grounded in the needs of the diocese when the members of the Pastoral Council also collaborated in the elaboration, and not just in a consultative way. I believe that this is one of the points that should be submitted to deliberation, seeking consensus so that those points that are introduced in the pastoral plan are realistic, are possible, and everyone feels obliged to work for them, because they have been deliberately decided by all. Surely there will be, in addition to the pastoral plan, other matters of greater importance that can be put to the consultation and deliberation of the Council. And this should be clearly established in the statutes of Pastoral Council. What issues of most relevance to the diocese does the bishop consider to be submitted to the judgment, evaluation, and decision of the Pastoral Council? It would also be a very important step forward for the governance of the dioceses. I think there are two aspects that could be linked to what I'm saying, and that would be matters, issues to think about, to deal with, to discern, because they seem to me important in the life of the diocesan church. One of them, the first, is the issue of transparency in the exercise of the pastoral function. I'm not just talking about the issue of economics and accountability. I repeat, not only accounts relating to the use of resources or expenditures, revenues, and so on. That is not a bad thing that there is transparency at this level as well, but that there is transparency at all levels of diocesan life. Why? Because why decisions are made? Why certain appointments are made? Why certain realities are created, so that everyone knows how they are proceeding and what are the evangelical and ecclesial reasons on which these decisions are being based. Transparency, accountability, that the bishop and those who are most directly responsible for the governance of the diocese must be active subjects. They must be the first ones interested in getting things done clearly, with open doors. The Diocesan Pastoral Council can be a very good place to communicate all these aspects and to highlight the necessary transparency and accountability on the part of the bishops and their leaders who are more directly responsible. Finally, I think that another aspect in which the Diocesan Pastoral Council could or should intervene directly is the issue of the election of the bishop of the diocese. This is a matter that has also been asked during the sessions of this first assembly of the Synod. And it is obviously an issue that concerns the people of God, and that is of great concern. Why? Because it is necessary to find pastors who are really the ones who meet the necessary conditions to govern, specifically the people of God. We know that right now the issue of the election of bishops is oriented by the nunciature, that the normal way is for the nuncio to put the files together to ask for reports. There is no record that the diocesan pastoral councils have been asked on a regular basis about possible candidates to occupy the diocesan see. And I believe that this would also be a step forward in the involvement of the entire people of God, also in a synodal way in the election of their own pastor. I think the first step could be the creation of some of the suitability profiles given by the Diocesan Pastoral Council itself, which could shed a lot of light when it comes to determining whether one candidate or another is more or less suitable for that diocese. Not all dioceses are the same. Not all of them have the same needs. Not all of them have the same pastoral journey. Well, it is clear that this also requires a specific profile and not a person in the abstract. I mean, this could also be a very important element in which the Diocesan Pastoral Council should intervene, if not already proposing names directly, but we what would be another step forward, at least to be heard concerning the profile that the person who is going to lead the diocese must have. Well, these are a few notes regarding the renewal of the pastoral councils, which are neither exhaustive nor profound, but are a line that I think should be implemented in the future.